should get started. I actually did just want to, I think we all just come into this assuming that we all know your story because we've been telling your story at Hunker, but would love to just get your sort of quick, I'm sure you guys have a spiel. I'd love to hear you tell it, actually.
Sure. Well, the three founders, John, myself, and Charlie Laser, all went to Williams College together, and we were, among other things, interested in art and sculpture. We graduated and we traveled around Asia for, I don't know, almost a year. Kind of a $10 a day, pretty scrappy trip. But just sort of going around the world and looking at things. We'd come out of Williams and we had this sort of similar idea about the built environment and looking at it and just had an interest in things and started to talk a little bit, I think, even then about the idea of maybe there was a way to have a company that would do something creative. And I think it was nothing more articulate than that. And then it was really about, 10 years after we graduated that we sort of kind of started percolating this idea of what could it be, what would the company be, and it stemmed out of a need that we had actually as consumers, sort of frustrated consumers, looking for modern furniture to furnish our first apartments, and going out in the world and really, not being able to afford what we liked and not liking what we could afford. So if it was modern, it was really expensive. You had to go to the design center, you had to have the secret handshake, you had to go with the designer. It was made in Europe, it took 16 weeks to get, and it was $20,000. And so we were sort of naive enough to think, I bet we could do this better. And we thought there was a place for a more moderately priced modern furniture. So that was kind of the original, it's a focus group of three, essentially, the three of us. And that was kind of the beginning of the idea.
Yeah, and I think our goals were modest. I mean, we wanted to build a business, but we just wanted to be able to spend our days doing what we love to do. I mean, we liked our jobs at the time, I think, but we were like, wouldn't it be great to build a company and get to go to work every day and do what you love to do and make a living? And so I think that's sort of important because we're really focused on the work as opposed to the business. The business is important, of course, but the sort of work came first.
Yeah, the business was sort of an infrastructure to support the design habit.
Yeah. Right. That's great. I love that. I love that idea. Yeah. You mentioned that you guys went back and forth on the name. Do you want to tell us?
Did you see some of the names in the book?
I did, but I would love for you to talk about kind of what that process was like and whether there was any, there were any tense moments there, but also how you kind of arrived where you did.
It's amazing that we arrived at where we did without much tension.
I don't remember any tension.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we were relieved that we didn't pick some of the terrible names that we almost came up with.
Yeah. Can you mention a few of those?
Chop wood, carry water. That was actually a better one.
Yeah.
That was better than Angry Lady.
Iron Dog Design or something like that. Right. Everything sounded like
there were a lot of industrial, like rivet or timber. There were a lot of those. We were trying to kind of capture nostalgia for the kind of industrial era.
Yeah.
And then there were a bunch of snowboard companies
sounding names.
Yeah. What we knew we never wanted was we didn't want a sort of a heritage brand that sounds like your grandparents. We wanted it to be kind of more neutral and more humble than that in a way. So I think it came about at some point where we started thinking about how the mark might be used, what the logo might look like, and how it would be used across catalogs and packaging. And I think the idea was, somebody suggested, what if it was just a simple shape like a Blu Dot? And it was also about the same time that Prince had changed his name to a symbol. So we thought maybe it should just be a Blu Dot without any writing at all, like literally just a Blu Dot. But we couldn't figure out how it would go into the phone book, or if you picked up the phone, what you would say if there was actually no type. So we eventually ended up with the Blu Dot.
Right, but we had it with the letter E in it originally.
You did. I thought I remembered that actually.
Yeah. And we had a friend who was a graphic designer, and when we were trying to just develop the brand identity, he's a great graphic designer, and he worked for trade. So he said, "I'll do your identity if you design and build a treehouse for my son."
Because we had no money.
Yeah, so we agreed to that, and he came back with a really thoughtful presentation, and he sort of channeled Paul Rand, the great graphic designer, who famously sort of only presents his clients with one option. Like for Steve Jobs, he's like, Steve Jobs was apparently like, well, what are the other two options? He's like, no, this is the option. And so Stuart did the same thing to us, and he came dropped the letter E because the letters kind of line up and makes a nice logo. And we objected. We were like, I think that's too tricky. We're all about what you see is what you get, straightforward design, that seems too Euro or something. And he was adamant, he's like, well, then I'm done. It's this or like nothing. And we're like, okay, we'll take it.
We'll take it.
Yeah,
Fine,
how else can we find someone that will design our logo for a tree fort?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I'd love to see that tree fort, by the way. Is it still
It was
standing?
like half built. We got about half built, and then we gave him $1,000 to finish it. I think because we were like,
Yeah, you
we don't have
probably
any
had a
time.
day job, at that
It's
point,
actually
so.
still standing. Yeah, it is still standing. His son just is finishing up college now, which is crazy.
I would love to kind of get you to talk a little bit about kind of how the book idea came about and what the process. It is a very personal, very intimate portrait. What was that process like? What made you want to do it? Obviously, there was this great kind of anniversary moment, but sort of how did it come about?
Mm-hmm.
We got connected with these great book designers based in, or actually graphic designers, but they've done a lot of books based in Brooklyn called Everything Type Company or ETC, and started. They were just like, why didn't you guys have a book? We would love to work on a book with you, and so we started to work with them on that, not knowing where it would go, and they had a connection with Rizzoli, and that's how we got connected with Rizzoli. But yeah, so we sat down, and actually they were really helpful in framing up what the sort of sections of the book might be. And we didn't have a great interest in just a coffee table book that was a monograph of pictures of our work and our designs. I feel like there's a lot of those, and I don't know, we just that wasn't super compelling. So having the oral history was their idea, which was just interviews with the three of us and others who were kind of in our orbit or in that space during our last 20 years to kind of tell our story that way. And we find that when we do public speaking or anything like that, the questions inevitably are around, in the sort of question and answer period, are around, well, how did you do it? Like, did you take any funding? Like, how did you actually build the company? Less about the work, less about design. The questions, anyways.
And that was really important. And I think that's what the oral history accomplished. Was the book, it wasn't a coffee table book that was out pretty pictures of our work, but it's this whole story, which is a business story. It's a story of friends. It's a story of design, and it was really important for us to get all those pieces in, and that it wasn't just about the product. And I think that gets back to the collaboration, that there was that the oral history, as you read it, it's a collaborative history in the sense that it's different people talking about the history of the company, and it's also talking about like all the things that we did together. So I thought the oral history was really a great piece. And then the section that I think is the most fun is the section that has the faxes. John mentioned before, we communicated. Charlie was in Phoenix, I was in Chicago, and John was in Minneapolis, and we were communicating back and forth about what are we going to do, what's the company going to be called, what are the values that the company will have. And there wasn't, like, maybe if you're a professor at a university you had email, but nobody had email. And phone calls, I don't know if we knew how to conference call back in those days. So fax was the logical thing. So we would, and we all had the thermal, like the curled up thermal fax paper, and we would send these faxes back and forth, and we would write very thoughtful questions and missives and theories, and then fax them to each other and fax each other back. And you could also sketch and do things like that in fax. So then the book designers found this paper that has that kind of waxy, thin quality to it. And so there's, a dozen pages of those faxes that are great. And as you said before, that sort of, they're kind of unvarnished. I mean, we were just like,
kind of.
Here it is. Yeah.
Totally
have you read this over and over again just to make sure that there's nothing in here that's really embarrassing?
And really offensive, yeah.
Has the process and the work of doing what you guys do changed within the environment as it's changed? Or how do you see your role in that conversation changing?
I'm not sure it has changed. I mean, we've pretty much stuck to what we originally set out to do. In creating this book, we went through these old faxes that we sent one another when we were just dreaming up Blu Dot, and actually some people in the office that have not been at Blu Dot very long read a few of them, and they were kind of freaked out a little bit because the words that we were using in these faxes before the company was even started are the same language that we use today to describe what we're trying to do. And yes, lots of things have kind of grown up around us, and this sort of vast middle between, IKEA on the low end and high end, European imports at the top end. There's lots of stuff now filling that gap where we originally were one of the few. But it's a huge market and a huge business, and we believe that, rising tide lifts all boats, And our stuff isn't perfect for every room in your house, but we hope it's good for a couple of rooms, and we're totally fine that you're mixing and matching with other people's stuff too. So there's plenty to go around.
When we started talking about Blu Dot in the early or mid 90s, it was really different. There was no CB2. IKEA had maybe 2 stores on the coasts. What else? There was no West Elm. There was no Design Within Reach. There was no internet. There was no way to research modern furniture. So it was really different. I think you have to think back to that time to realize that there really was a sort of a desert at this price point and this aesthetic.
Yeah.
But I think that we just kept doing what we were doing, and I don't think there's really today it's not different in the sense that there aren't 4 or 5 other companies that are just like Blu Dot, right? I mean, a lot of people say, well, who's your direct competitor? And we'll sort of say, well, there's no, we don't have a Tufted Needle to our Casper, or if you look at that space, you can list 7 companies really quickly that all do exactly the same thing. And if you look at Blu Dot, we compete against, let's say, Design Within Reach. They're more expensive, and they're not their own designs. We're designing everything ourselves, and we start, as we mentioned before, we start from a place of design. So we're not going out in the marketplace and buying things. So they're different. And then there are designers that are designing for European manufacturers. So that's a different model. So I feel like we're still pretty kind of alone in our space.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And since you're sort of referencing, I would love to kind of hear more about the actual process, because having been to your sort of HQ, and you really get that sense of like everything is happening right here, right? Like this is where the founders are, this is where everybody works, this is where people work out. Like everything, it feels like there's this wonderful sort of self-containment to the business, and would love to hear sort of the process of how a given piece of furniture or a given product sort of begins and ends.
That's funny. I think back, I think our very first office was really a shop. I mean, it was a shop with tools and everything else before we had an office. I mean, it starts in the early days. It started with the 3 of us sitting at a long table, and we had a roll of butcher paper bolted to the end of the table, and we just pull it out across the table, and we sort of each of us come to the conversation with different ideas. And, one of us might sketch it out, and then we'd have this kind of charrette where we'd be drawing over each other's drawings, and sometimes it would be me misinterpreting one of Maurice's drawings that was actually more interesting than the combination of either of our drawings that would lead to something. So, the design process has always been really collaborative that way. But now we're more disciplined. I think back then we were just sort of whatever inspired us, we sort of chased. And now we're trying to really more carefully kind of curate our assortment and our collection. Like what do we need? What's missing? So we're a little bit more disciplined about what we work on. But it still starts the same way with drawings, with getting into the shop, making rough scale models, rough prototypes. We still design collaboratively, although our design team is much bigger than the 3 of us. We have 5 full-time designers. So, and we still don't, put any of our names on any of the designs, because we just never felt then, and we still don't feel now that they're a solo effort. There's an element of time, and we sort of think of it as like these slow sedimentary layers. They're just building brick by brick over time, build the greatest brands.
One of the things I was curious about is being kind of a Midwest-based business, but with what I would imagine is a clientele that is at least in large parts coastal.
Sure.
How do you think that's informed the way you think about your product, your customer, your marketing, all of that stuff, if at all? Aside from the Prince reference, which clearly played a big part.
I don't know. It allows us to kind of do our own thing a little bit. We're not in San Francisco or New York and kind of caught up in the what's everybody doing and looking over everyone's shoulder. And you can see that if you want to. You can go online and you can see what everybody's doing in Milan and New York. But it just feels like we have a little space to kind of do what we want. And I think that makes sense. I think it makes sense for the company, given this sort of practical, the humility that we like to kind of infuse in all of our products and our marketing, that it makes more sense that we're in Minneapolis. Yeah, and I think the Eames and a lot of the mid-century designers and I don't know which of the Eames said that the best for the most for the least.
Yeah.
That idea of sort of democratizing design and getting it out in the world, that was important.
Yeah. That pragmatism and humility is kind of a Midwestern thing, even though none of us grew up in the Midwest. I mean, we just ended up in Minneapolis, but we've been there for a long time now. But yeah, I mean,
but we learned how to be humble.
Yeah.
from being there.
They're, yeah, I mean, even the great, like Charles and Ray Eames, sort of all the great design that came out of Michigan and that part of the world. And they were very modest, humble people too. So there's sort of a tradition of that. Not that that's the reason we did it. I think that's the kind of brand we wanted to create, because we also felt like there was that people in our space, people in modern design, sometimes just take themselves way too seriously, and there's sort of an elitism to sort of higher end modern design, and we felt like we could kind of take the piss out of that and do it differently.
I know so much of your story is about that kind of brick by brick, like, not heroic moments. But I would love to know for you guys, first of all, given that you're kind of in a milestone moment right now, if you were to look back, what are some of like the sort of really validating, really exciting moments for you as you went along that kind of got you to the next thing where you said, like, I think we're actually succeeding at this, or this is a really good feeling?
Yeah. I don't know, the first ICFF.
Well, that was when we first started.
Yeah, when we first started, so the very first kind of presentation of Blu Dot to the world was at the International Contemporary Furniture Fair in New York. And so no one had really seen it. I guess we had a small focus group in Minneapolis of some people that were kind of reassured us. But that was sort of the first moment. And so the doors opened up and we just thought, what if nobody stops in the booth? What if nobody wants anything? And it was really successful. We had a lot of people in, a lot of interest. And as we expected, there was this acknowledgement of this sort of price point in the market that was there was just a gap.
Yeah.
And they saw that we filled that gap. And so I think that was really the first moment that, wow, this is really something. Like, this is a real business. We have something here.
Yeah. I mean, opening our first store. So when we started Blu Dot, we thought we would be a wholesale business. So we were selling to the sort of, the one or two really cool design shops in every city. And that those stores would then sell multiple people's stuff, right? Not just ours. And that was a good business, and we actually we still do that. But we knew it was limited. We could see that the demand for what we were doing was much bigger than what we could sort of access through that channel. So maybe about 8 or 9 years into Blu Dot, we decided to open a store, our own first store, which was in Soho. And I remember signing the lease, and it was, it's a small store. We just closed it and opened a bigger one, but the lease was $35,000 a month, which was like writing that first check was kind of like for us, was like, ugh, like God, like 30 days I got to write another one of these, like we got to sell some sofas,
And the security deposit.
Well, the security deposit was a year's worth of rent. The security deposit was $400,000 or whatever. So yeah, it was
because we were a small business.
Yeah.
They didn't know who we were.
We just literally got that security deposit back at 12/31 of this year after 10 years. So that was a big step, but we knew we had to take it, and we knew that we could kind of maybe do a better job of presenting all of our work all together. But it was a turning point in the sense too that we'd never really presented our work all together in one space, and we never really conceived of our designs that way. We conceived of them really as individual objects because that's the way our customers bought them. They didn't buy the whole assortment. They'd be like, oh, I like that bookcase, and I like that chair, and I like this table.
Because the customers were retailers,
yeah,
multi-brand retailers.
Yeah, and they'd mix those pieces in with other things. So when we opened a store and put them all together, we realized we didn't have, we didn't have a lot of stuff. We didn't have rugs. We didn't. The colors, the sort of materials and finishes were never conceived to all go together, so it looked like Skittles, and it was not ideal.
It's a little terrifying.
Yeah. So that shaped how we design now. I mean, now we think of it holistically because we present it holistically. So we now design rugs, and we design lighting, and we design some more accessories, more of the sort of sprinkles in between, and kind of spent the next 10 years kind of rounding out our assortment.
You guys have mentioned a couple of times this idea of solving problems, which is, of course, what I think all of us who love design really love about it when it's at its best.
We just introduced a fire poker.
Oh, that's great.
Just, not a fireplace set or whatever of tools, because we were always like, I never use the shovel and the broom. I only use the poker.
Yeah.
So we just designed a fire poker, and it was fun because we were trying to name it, and somebody, we're doing it as a group, and somebody said, what about Pokey? And we're like, yeah, that's cool. But then somebody goes, well, what about like Pokey Pokerson? And we're like, oh, that's even better. Somebody chimed in and goes, "What about Pokey Von Pokerson?" So we're like, done. So
Nailed
we have
it.
a new fire poker called Pokey Von Pokerson.
That's great. That sounds like one of the more fun things you get to do.
It's
is
hard,
actually
but
name,
yeah, it is fun, and we're not always very good at it. But sometimes it's less inspired. But that was like that topped the list.
Yeah.
Maurice has got some really good ones. Son of a Bench is really good.
That's a really good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hot mesh.
Mesh is really good too.
Did you ever see the turkey leg?
No.
We did a cast.
I did see that.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So that wasn't really solving a problem.
No, but that's the thing. Sometimes it might solve somebody's
It
problem.
was
We
going to
don't
be a
know.
knocker. It was going to be a door knocker.
Oh, I
but
love
it sort
that.
of didn't work for a variety of reasons.
It looked a
Right.
little too anthropomorphic. Yeah, but no, yeah, that was fun. That's the nice thing about, I think, having your own business. And even though we're a bigger company now, we compete against bigger companies that would never name products Son of a Bench and would never randomly produce a cast, iron cast. Yeah, it was cast iron, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Brass?
Yeah, it wasn't bronze. It looked like bronze, but yeah, cast iron turkey leg. We were like, well, why not? What the hell? So
Yeah.
it's fun. It's fun to be able to, and it'd be important. We always say we just want to make sure we don't kind of lose that. Like, you don't start getting risk averse as you get bigger.
That's right.
Right. And so, yeah, we think about what are the things that these other brands can't do? Like, what's the voice they don't have that we do have, that we have to kind of not lose that voice?
Yeah. Well, and that element of humor and lightness and self-awareness, I think is, as you guys pointed out earlier, it's sometimes missing from, from serious modern design
Yeah.
brands. And the idea that you can have all of it can be beautiful, functional, like original, great design that also doesn't take itself so seriously that,
Right.
it's sort of forbidding to just a normal person. Is really it continues to be refreshing.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, we always say so everyone's invited to our party. Like we never as a company or a brand never want to be sort of too cool for school. So yeah, it's important.